prolonged or repeated exposure to sounds at or above 85 decibels can cause noise-induced hearing loss and tinnitus. But sometimes, all it takes is once. Many United States veterans can relate.
One instance can cause tinnitus, or repeated exposure can cause tinnitus. One gunshot can cause tinnitus. Some people, it could take years of being in the military. Some people leave the military and not have tinnitus.
Dr. Dave Harris is an associate professor and director of audiology at St. Louis University School of Medicine. He explains how tinnitus is the perception of sound.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
The phantom sounds vary in loudness and pitch from low to high, described as ringing, buzzing, roaring, whistling, humming, clicking, hissing, squealing, blowing, and sizzling.
It's not really treatable, regardless of what people sell on television to say get rid of these kind of things. It's just very difficult. Now, there are certain things that can exaggerate it. Stress can make it louder, certain medications, but unfortunately, the only thing we could do is kind of condition people to live with it. When you're on an elevator, you notice the music. After a while, if you're on an elevator long enough, you don't notice it anymore. And that is the idea of what you want to do with tinnitus as well, to actually try to condition people to ignore the tinnitus.
Harris provides assessments and treatment for noise and chemical-induced hearing loss and tinnitus.
If you're exposed to a certain level that's typically like 85 decibels or greater, it can be damaging over time. One single gunfire can actually cause tinnitus as well, and that's just in an instant, but that's what's called impact noise.
Studies show that hearing loss and tinnitus affects up to 30% of military veterans. According to a 2020 report by the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, more than 1.3 million veterans were receiving disability compensation for hearing loss, and more than 2.3 million received compensation for tinnitus.
It will be a high-frequency hearing loss for the most part, and it's not because of the pitch of the actual sound, it's just how your cochlea is actually anatomically is. So if you have damage to a hair cell that's in your cochlea, but yet your brain is looking for that, one theory is it creates a tone that's not there. So some people will have that. You can have someone who, let's say, perceived tinnitus in their head. You could sever the auditory nerve for both ears and they're deaf, but they still perceive a tone in their head. So it really, kind of depends. Sometimes it's really coming from the ear, but yes, your brain is picking it up. And you go to a loud concert, your ears are ringing. Well, your hair cells in your cochlea are just fried. And then eventually over time, it goes away. But when you are tasking your ear like that on a regular basis, it can become permanent.
Harris is trying to get a better understanding of ways to help veterans and everyone who could be harmed by loud noise exposure. Harris conducts research into noise and chemical-induced hearing loss and tinnitus. In a recent study, he focused his attention on the emergency transport of children in a helicopter to determine hearing outcomes and best practices.
We've done research with noise exposure and helicopter transportation of children. And they're given hearing protection usually. But yeah, it is pretty loud. We kind of take a lot of these little things for granted. In fact, a lot of younger kids started getting hearing loss at a younger and younger age back in about 2002, and that's because of the introduction of the iPod.
Harris says the only way to avoid noise-induced hearing problems is to avoid noises that are too loud, too close, or last too long, or wear hearing protection. And don't forget, hearing tests are important.
If that goes unchecked, it leads towards cognitive decline, dementia, anxiety. It just snowballs into other things because then you get into central auditory processing issues. So yeah, you should really, get a hearing test every year once you start reaching 60 plus. Stay on top of it just like anything else. Say the word baseball. Say the word cowboy,